I moved to Cedar Grove when I was 26, lured by the promise of white picket fences and Sunday barbecues that filled the air with the smell of grilled corn and fresh rosemary. I'm Alex Morgan, a freelance illustrator who works from home, and I fell in love with the quiet cul-de-sac on Birchwood Drive the moment I saw it. Neat lawns, friendly waves, and little wooden mailboxes painted in pastel shades. My house sat on a gentle slope near a grove of maples, and every morning I'd sip coffee on the front porch while sketching the way sunlight danced through the leaves. It felt like a dream until Marlene Henderson, the head of our homeowners association, knocked on my door one Saturday with her clipboard and perfectly coiffed hair. Right away, I sensed something off about her polite smile and the way she tapped her manicured nail against the clipboard's metal clip. "Good morning, Alexandra," she said, even though I'd told her to call me Alex. "I wanted to discuss a few compliance issues with your property." I invited her into the living room, pointed to a woven rug I'd brought back from a summer trip, and asked what the problem was. She sighed dramatically and told me I'd painted my front door the wrong shade of teal, that my vegetable garden encroached half an inch onto the common path, and that my welcome sign didn't match the HOA's font guidelines. She made it sound urgent, as if the stability of Cedar Grove depended on my door color, and I nodded along, promising I'd fix everything by Monday. It was the first inkling I had that Marlene didn't just enforce rules, she wielded them like a weapon. I spent the next afternoon repainting the door a slightly duller teal, trimming the garden edge with a trowel, and buying a replacement sign printed in Times New Roman. But the victory felt hollow. Marlene emailed me that evening to say she'd noticed a single blade of grass in my neighbor's yard was exactly half a centimeter too long, apparently. The HOA expected every blade within a 2-block radius to be identical. I stared at the screen, incredulous, and realized she wasn't interested in community. She wanted control. Over the next few weeks, letters arrived like clockwork: a fine for a crooked fence shadow, a citation for a single pine cone on my sidewalk, a 3-page report on the exact curvature of my garden's stone border. Each note arrived sealed with the HOA's gold foil stamp and Marlene's signature, which looked more like a taunt than a blessing. I tried to reason with her over coffee, dropped by her apartment on the 3rd floor of the condo complex she owned, but she waved me off, insisting rules were rules. Meanwhile, she hosted monthly neighborhood mixers in her backyard that felt more like royal courts than casual gatherings: crystal flutes, imported cheeses, small plates arranged on silver trays, all under the gaze of a towering white pergola. Everyone there pretended to laugh at her jokes while I hovered by the punch bowl, sipping lukewarm lemonade and feeling more like an intruder with each gust of gossip about property values and painting codes. I wondered how a simple decorator and gardener became our self-appointed monarch. I tried to connect with other neighbors: Mia on 5th, who loved salsa dancing, Roberto on Maple, who played the cello, but they all seemed either too afraid to cross Marlene or too enchanted by her lavish soiree to notice her iron grip. That was when I noticed the old oak sapling in my backyard, newly planted last spring, had started to lean dangerously toward Marlene's property line. It was, according to the HOA bylaws, technically a violation if any part of its canopy extended a single leaf onto her turf. I timed it one Sunday morning. Marlene's front gate was open, and a cluster of her golden retrievers lounged on her patio, soaking up the sun. I climbed the fence in my sneakers, snipped back the few offending branches, and plopped them in a basket. As I hopped down, I thought I heard a bark of alarm, but I brushed it off. By afternoon, Marlene had sent me a fine for unauthorized trespass and damage to HOA property. It was the last straw. I decided that if she believed she could bend every rule to her whim, I would find a way to turn her own policy manual against her. I spent that night drafting a detailed complaint to the county about the HOA's overreach, but my calm submission didn't faze Marlene. I received her instant email reply, threatening to escalate to small claims court and charging me thousands in administrative fees. By then, I was simmering with frustration, alternating between disbelief and anger, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I knew I needed evidence that her actions weren't just snobbery, but abuses of power. So I borrowed a compact camera, set it on a tripod at the edge of her driveway, and recorded Marlene as she flounced out each morning to water her ferns in a pink silk robe. I captured her handing hefty invoices to neighbors who tried to install new mailboxes, her supervising a GPS survey of my lawn angle, and her issuing a cease and desist to the local Girl Scouts selling cookies at a charity stand. The proof piled up into hours of footage showing her relentless pursuit of microscopic infractions. Meanwhile, I quietly rallied a handful of neighbors who had suffered similar penny ante punishments and accidental misplacement of a bird bath, a single creaking floorboard in an unused shed, a stray pumpkin from Halloween that lingered in a flower bed. We created a shared drive and uploaded everything: the letters, the fines, the screenshots, the video clips, the HOA's own rulebook marked up with every time she'd abused it. I felt a thrill as I watched the footage, her face frozen in indignation, her voice dripping with self-righteousness, knowing it would speak louder than any polite email. Then I crafted a formal request for a special general meeting of the HOA, citing our bylaws that any homeowner could gather 10% of the membership to call one. Within an hour, we had the signatures. The day of the meeting arrived, and I stood in the community clubhouse walls lined with watercolor paintings of the neighborhood. Fake ivy curling around the beams, flanked by a dozen brave neighbors. Marlene entered, draped in a bright scarf and wearing those oversized sunglasses she favored. Her clipboard held like a shield. She greeted us with that same cool smile, blinking behind her dark lenses as if she'd walked into a welcome party instead of a tribunal. I began by playing a short montage of her indiscretions on the clubhouse's projector, a time-lapse of her measuring a lawn's every inch, footage of her shutting down a neighbor's impromptu violin recital, and that early morning shot of her dog growling at me as I trimmed the sapling. The room sat in stunned silence. One by one, I displayed the fines she'd levied, each more petty than the last, and then read excerpts from the county guidelines proving that her actions exceeded the HOA's authority. When I finished, the ladies in their floral blouses and the gentlemen in pastel polos turned to glare at Marlene. Some voices shook as they accused her of tyranny. Others spoke with a weary resignation that it had gone on too long. Marlene tried to compose herself, closing her eyes and pinching the bridge of her nose, then sputtered that the meeting was invalid. that she had the authority to override any motion. But we had the bylaws in hand, formally adopted and notarized, and we held the signed petitions. The tension in the room crackled until our HOA secretary announced we had the quorum to vote on her removal from office. There were no more objections, just a flood of raised hands and unanimous murmurs of assent. I heard Marlene let out a breath like a balloon deflating, watched her shoulders slump as the motion passed. The clubhouse felt suddenly empty, like a stage after the final curtain. I spoke up to propose a provisional board of neighbors to rewrite the bylaws, to ensure fairness, and to prevent future autocrats, and one by one, hands shot up volunteering Mia, Roberto, even Mrs. Klein from next door, who had a flair for event planning. Marlene remained seated, her silence louder than any protest. After we adjourned, I escorted her to the door and offered a polite nod. No triumphalism, just a quiet hope that she'd learn to relinquish her chokehold on the neighborhood. She didn't look at me, only took her sunglasses off and stared straight ahead, then walked out into the afternoon sun without a word. I felt a strange mix of relief and compassion as I shut the door behind her. Knowing that rebuilding trust wouldn't be instant, but believing that Cedar Grove was on its way to becoming the community I'd once imagined. That evening, I stepped onto my front porch with a cup of tea, the maple leaves rustling overhead, and sketched the scene. No rigid rules, no clipboard-clad enforcers, just neighbors sharing stories and laughter. For the first time since I'd arrived, it truly felt like home.